In this next scene, we're going to add some more geometry, and we'll be adding some pillars and stone blocks here. And we'll start by creating a first pillar here next to the steps. So we'll need to move the 3D cursor, this red and white circle right here. So let's find some nice place here next to the steps, for example here. So hold shift and right mouse button, click here, and we'll need to create the plane there. So let's press shift A, create a plane. Now tab into the edit mode and scale it down to define the thickness of the pillar, so something like this, and then extrude this. So press E and then drag up the height of the pillar. I think something like this would be enough. Okay, so here we have our new pillar, and to make it a little bit more interesting, we can make something like a little cap up here, and you can do that by extruding. So let's press E, but instead of dragging, just right click the mouse button and now press S to scale, and scale the new face out. Okay, and extrude once again to finish the cap. So let's press E and then extrude. Okay, now if you look from the bottom, we have a nice geometry there. So if you need to do something like this, remember you can always just cancel the extrude and it will create a new geometry, just it'll be in the place of the old one, and you can then scale it up and create some crevices like this. Now let's modify the shape of the pillar, and I want to slice it here on the vertical axis. So Ctrl R and then increase the number of cuts with the mouse wheel and confirm. We can cancel the movement with the right mouse button, and right away I can see I maybe made this pillar too thick, so let's press A to select all, S to scale, Shift Z to enable scaling only on these two axes, and yeah, let's scale it down a little bit. Okay, and right now we need to play with the shape a little bit. So yeah, let me just focus the object with the period on the numpad. So let's just select these vertices one by one and moving them with G, then confirming with the left mouse button. Nothing too crazy here, just to get rid of that uniform rectangular look, and maybe I would like a little bit of slide here on this top cap. So yeah, that would be nice. Okay, and right now we're gonna do some standard bevels as before on the ruin object. So just Ctrl B, then V, and remember to not go too much over the top. Yeah, and let's select this, Ctrl B, then V, make a bevel, and this one we can make larger by sliding this little vertex, so double G and slide it right here. Okay, and I want to do some more bevels here, so Ctrl B, then V, let's bevel this, and remember we can just triangulate this, so Ctrl T, and the same we can do here, triangulate that, and we can slide this vertex down, so left click and then double G to slide. Okay, if you tab out and check the pillar, I think it looks quite nice. Maybe we can modify this side too a little bit, so we can maybe make some adjustment to the shape, but nothing too fancy. Yeah, right now this is for the purpose of the illustration, and I know the illustration will be visible from this side, but if you're planning to do some animation or some world building using these methods, don't forget to check from every angle and maybe do some more details on the other side as well, so it works in the game environment or animation environment too. So let's tab out of the edit mode, and we'll need to add some more pillars and some more ruined geometry there. So yeah, I want to do something on the other side, so in approximately the same distance from the riverbed here, we can just shift right click to move the cursor, maybe a little bit further, and let's create a new plane. So shift A, click plane, enter into edit mode, scale it down to approximately the same size as the pillar we just created, and extrude it up. And this will be pretty much the same process, so slice it up 2 times, Ctrl R, then mouse wheel the number of cuts and confirm. And we can play with the shape here too, but right now if you're feeling lazy to do these to move these vertices manually, you can always enable proportional editing with O, and since we left the random fall off on, we can just click the vertex, press G to grab. Let's enable Shift Z to lock it on the X and Y plane and just move it a little bit. And I think this is enough. We can stop right there, turn off proportional editing, and maybe move some vertices around if we are not completely satisfied with the shape. Right now, yeah, let's just do some more bevels. So let's click the vertex, Ctrl B, then V. And I really like to do this bevel down here. I think it'll create interesting detail. And I want to slide this a little bit up. Now let's just bevel here. Ctrl B, then V, create the bevel, smaller one. And yeah, let's triangulate. So press Ctrl T to make that edge there. And we can select this vertex and edge slide it down with double G all the way to create some nice detail. And then we can do some little chip here. Ctrl T. And that's basically it for the next pillar. We look at it, I think looks okay. Yeah, maybe if you want, you can do some more of these here. Totally up to you. Now I want to create a new one here, and there are several ways how to approach that. We could snap the cursor and create it from a plane again, but I want to use already created geometry. So let's press Shift D to duplicate and then Y to lock it on the Y-axis and move it right here. And maybe let's move it a little bit further. So let's press G, then Y, and move it some more. And I think these two need to be a little bit larger. So let's shift click this one too and switch this from the medium point to the individual origins. And as you remember from the tree modeling, if you enable this for faces, they will scale according to their own origins, and same applies to the objects. So if I scale now, the object scale based on their origins. And let's switch this back to the medium point. Okay, Now I want some really large pillar to be lying on top of these two to create a T shape. So, and I don't want to use any existing geometry for that. And while we are speaking of existing geometry, I want to modify this a little bit to create a little bit of variation, because we used the same object, but since we duplicated with Shift D and not Alt, so it's not a link duplicate, we can edit this separately. So let's just select all, and press R to rotate, Z, and enter 90 degrees. And we can additionally change the shape a little bit to create even more variation. So let's enable proportional editing with O. We have random already selected. Click the vertex and just move it a little bit around. And we can enable Shift Z to have the X and Y plane only for movement. And we can maybe move this. Okay, and that should be enough for the basic variation. So tab out from the edit mode, and let's create that large pillar over these two. And first of all, snap the cursor on the top of the pillar here. So hold Shift and right click here and create a new plane. So Shift A, create a plane, tab into the edit mode, scale to select, a little something larger than the pillar itself. And we forgot to turn off the proportional editing, so do that. And right now we can just select these two vertices, press G and grab them on the y-axis to make them go over the second pillar as well. And now we can select all with A and extrude the pillar up like this. And since we want to play with the shape here too, I want to slice this, so Ctrl R, and I want to create 3 slices. So use mouse wheel for that and confirm with the click. Press escape if you want to cancel positioning, and let's play with the shape. And here there'll be nothing new, so you can either use proportional editing, so let's try that, or you can manually move the vertices. So let's try the proportional editing. So let's press O, random is there, so let's press G, Shift Z, and move this a little bit, maybe this one. Okay, but I want to add some variation on the Z-axis as well, but I don't want to break how these two are touching here. So let's turn off proportional editing and just select one vertex, and yeah, select them one by one and move them around a little bit. So always I'm just left clicking the vertex, pressing G and dragging around, then confirming again with the left click. Okay, so that's the large pillar up there, and as you can imagine, I want to do some bevels there. So let's go back into the edit mode and select this one, and I want it to be really large because I think it'll add some interest there. So Ctrl B, then V, and scale it up. We can additionally slide this down to make it even stronger. Now we can bevel this corner as well, so Ctrl B and V, and yeah, let's select this one, make a bevel there, and again Ctrl T to triangulate, and again here the same thing. If you want to remember how you can manually control the geometry, you can always just press X to delete, click faces, and you can select the vertices one by one and fill the hole with F. Sorry, but I made it in the wrong direction. So yeah, we want to do this. Maybe slide this to make it stronger. And one very little bevel here. Okay, and to finish the scene or finish these pillars, let's make this one a little bit bigger. So click it and press S to scale. And I want to use this one. Let's press Alt D to create a link duplicate. Press Shift Z to lock on the X and Y. Move somewhere here, and we can rotate it on the Y axis. So press R to rotate Y, and I want to rotate it 90 degrees. Minus. Yeah, and let's now rotate it around the Z axis to place it a little bit diagonally here. So R, then Z, and drag around, maybe something like this. And if we look from the top by pressing numpad 7, and we can press G to move it somewhere here, maybe. And now just adjust the Z position. So let's press G and Z and move it up. Remember, this is an uneven ground, so you want it to be touching here, basically on all four corners. And it doesn't matter if it goes inside the geometry a little bit. Next thing I want to create are large stone blocks next to the stairs here. So let's move there. I want to move a cursor, so shift right mouse button here, and let's create a cube. Press Shift A, mesh, and then cube. And right now the cube, and by default all objects, have origin in the middle. So there are several ways how to deal with that. First of all, we could create only a plane and then extrude it, and the plane would have origin on the base of the original plane, so it will be down. Or if you create a cube like this, you can always go into the edit mode, and since the default cube size is set to be 2 meters in diameter, you can just move it up in the edit mode 1 meter up. So let's press G, then Z, 1, and enter. And now the cube sits perfectly on the base and have its origin point at the bottom. And now we can scale this block to the size we want. So let's press S, then Shift Z, and scale it to something like this. And maybe we can grab these 4 vertices here and make it a little bit taller. So press G, then Z, grab it up. So it's a little bit larger than the structure here. Okay, and let's tab out of the edit mode, press G and X to move it on the X axis, and move it closer to the structure here. And now I want 2 other smaller blocks here, and we'll create it from this basic block because I don't want every time I create a new block, I don't want to go into the edit mode and move the cube up to have the pivot point at the bottom. So let's just go to the top view by pressing number 7, and we'll shift duplicate this. So press Shift D and move it here. And we can now scale this to something like 3/4 of the original object and move it closer on the X. And the advantage of this is obviously the position of the pivot point, which was at the bottom. So when we scale the whole object to the 3/4, not only we saw from the top how thick it is, but we scaled it accordingly to the ground plane. So that's very useful. So let's go back to the top view and press Shift D to duplicate another one. And let's move it here and scale again like 3/4 of the object before, and maybe press G and move it somewhere like here. We don't have to be too precise for this, so we have something like this going on. And I maybe want this object to be a little bit broader, so let's scale this up by pressing S and then Shift Z. Yeah, and let's go to the top view, exit edit mode and move it to a new place. Okay, and now we'll just adjust the shape of these rocks and do some bevels and chip away some rock. So you by now all know the drill, so let's move through this a little bit faster. But before we start, I want to slice this one here. So it's just Ctrl R and then slice, tab out, click this one, tab in, Ctrl R, make the cut. Okay, now we can try to select them all, and pressing tab enters the edit mode. But for all three objects, this is a new thing in Blender 2.8. You wouldn't be able to do such thing in the versions of Blender before, so that's very useful. And you can now just click some vertex, enable proportional editing, so let's click O, and maybe increase the fall off and move them around. Yeah, this is very convenient, but only because you can avoid tabbing out and into the edit mode all the time. But as you can see, you have to you need to have some vertex from the object selected to actually affect it with proportional editing. Okay, now we can turn out the proportional editing and just move some of these manually. Right now I'm using the G and Shift Z movement here to position them. Okay, and now for some bevels. Again, you can go completely random here and basically do whatever you want. So I want some larger bevel here, and remember it's Ctrl B then pressing V, and you can always select the vertex and edge slide it down. Same here and here, and we can triangulate this with Ctrl T and drag this down. And same for the other one. If you don't see your vertices because of the proportional editing, push them inside of another geometry. You can always go wireframe by holding Z and clicking there. And you can, for example, move the vertex a little bit back, and then you can bevel it as before. And here we created a nice little crease. So go around your objects and create all these interesting details. And here I went a little bit wilder with these bevels. But I think for this type of stoneworks it'll fit quite nicely. Maybe we can move this. Okay, and if we tab out and check it out, yeah, I really like the result. So that's for some additional stonework. Now let's tidy up our scene a little bit. So we'll properly name the objects in the outline view. So yeah, let's just select them one by one. And we can call this ruin, since they are of a similar nature than the base structure. So let's call them ruin. And as you already know, the Blender will append the number on that, so no worries there. So we call them ruins, and this one I will call pillar. Same for this and the rest of them. And one last thing we can do, as I mentioned before, I like to cluster and group objects into these collections. So then when I have a more complex scene, I can first of all easily navigate through that, and secondly, we can turn off and on these collection if they are obscuring something we are modeling or anything like that. So yeah, let's just select all of this except the ground plane and press M to move into the collection. Select new collection and let's call this ruins. Click OK. Now we have a nicely organized scene, and we can disable the ruins, we can disable the ground, reset the cursor with Shift C and move on to the next chapter.